Thank you, and I'd like to welcome you all to our first required in-person time. Excuse me. Yes, I want to welcome you all. Also welcome the public who are able to attend. And we'll give instructions later on how the public may participate. Martina, do we have any board members remote today? No, thank you. So we'll be able to be doing voice voting for votes, and we'll have to do roll call since no one is remote. I want to have Martina do the roll call first, please. Are you guys ready and everything okay?
Yes, sir. Starting, we've just had just a few audio disruptions, but we should be good to go now. And starting the roll call for the town of San Anselmo, Alexis Feynman.
Here.
For the town of Corte Madera, Fred Casisa.
Here.
For the Muir Beach Community Services District, Paul Jeschke. Not here today. And for the Southern Marin Fire District, Director Catherine Hilliard.
Here.
For the City of Mill Valley, Director Stephen Burke. For the Kenfield Fire District, Director Barry Evergettis. Present. And for the Inverness Fire District, Director Catherine Donahue.
Here.
For the City of Larkspur, Director Gabe Paulson.
Here.
For the Marinwood Community Services District, Director Bill Shea. Not here just yet. For the Town of Fairfax, Director Barbara Kohler.
Here.
For the Bolinas Fire District, Director Claire Molesworth.
Here.
For the for the City of San Rafael, Director Rachel Kurtz.
Here.
For the Sleepy Hollow Fire District, Director Tom Finn. It's like he's not here yet. And for the Novato Fire District, Director Bruce Goings. He's also absent for this meeting. For the Stinson Beach Fire District, Director Mark White. For the Town of Ross, Director Julie McMillan.
Here.
And for the County of Marin, President Dennis Rodoni.
Present. You.
And we do
Item
have-
3 is the agenda. Does anyone have any suggested adjustments to the agenda? All right, seeing no suggestions. we'll stop.
Chair, I just
ahead.
want to mention, you have a lot of feedback on your microphone. I don't know if it's the mic. Maybe they need to change it out.
Try a little further away. Is that any better? Okay. Thank you for mentioning that, Barbara. So item 4 is open time for public expression. The public is welcome to address the Board of Directors this time on matters not on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of the board. Please be advised that pursuant to the government code, the board is not permitted to take action on any matter not on the agenda. And comments should be no longer than 3 minutes and should be respectful to the community. Just a reminder to silence your phone during the meeting and mute your microphone when not reporting out. So we'll go to open time in the board chamber, and I only see one public member and she's shaking her head no. So we can go online, Martina, when you get a chance to do that, please.
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those joining us by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself. And sir, there are no hands for public comment.
Thank you, Martina. Item 5 is the executive officer's report. Mark, turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, President Rodoni, board members. Welcome to our first official fully in-person meeting. Wow. Appreciate all of you who, especially those from West Marin that had quite a drive to get here. coming through the park, I would imagine, or around the Cassia Reservoir, coming up and over the mountain. Thank you very much. Just a quick note, we do have Tom Finn, who is attending as an attendee. Since he's not here in person, he's just going to observe the meeting and not participate in the meeting. And with no further ado, I'll start my report. And I would like to start by acknowledging that today is Women's History, or this month is Women's History Month. And I look at our board with just so many women that are continuing to create history in the county of Marin, specifically with the MWPA, helping to create the MWPA, and then your careers as public servants on your boards and councils. Thank you very much. And I think I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge another woman in our midst who has made significant history here in the county, and that's Jean Bonander. Her contributions are, I wouldn't say endless, but close. And but I think one significant contribution is her efforts quite some time ago. We won't put a date on it, Jean, to help create a cooperative for insurance for the local governments to join and get affordable insurance. And I think that type of partnership that Jean helped pioneer is what led to us being able to have a partnership like the MWPA. So I did want to acknowledge the great women that we have working in the county of Marin making history. And it is Grizzly Court Appreciation Week. We do this every year with the Grizzly Corps. In March, they asked that we do an appreciation for our fellows, which I think is completely appropriate. I promised to embarrass them, but they gave me nothing to really embarrass them. I want to acknowledge Andrea Salinas and Elena Benching on how great they have been and what they have meant for the MWPA. Andrea has brought just a ton of energy. Her connection with our communities is growing every day. She's been reaching out and working with our community-based organizations, with our residents side by side. She's been helping us dramatically improve our bilingual capabilities. She's been working closely with Fire Safe Marin with the bilingual aspect, but she also is very interested in the GIS aspect of our work and has been helping Anne immensely with her GIS work. And then we have Elena, who is very interested in continuing her learning in the environmental sciences. She just received a scholarship for a upcoming course that she's going to attend, but she also has a great eye for communications, and she's been really helping us. Well, the executive officer report that I send after each of our board meetings, she's the one who designed that. And she had there, and it wasn't just, oh, let's do this. She actually had reasons on how she put it all together. And then she's been working hard with a lot of our social media messaging. So really want to thank our two fellows that we have working for us. And moving on to our the rest of my report, we have updated our science and research page. Thank you to Elena. Like I said, we have added that weather section. We have some red flag information in there, and also the historical trends of fire seasons following a drought busting year. But we also, thank you to the Marin Conservation League, have a new research paper that we have put up under fuel reduction overview. It's called spatial. No, excuse me. Strategic project landscape area treatment. That's it. And that is acknowledging it. This is a research paper that was written in 2018. Scott Stevens was from the UC Berkeley, is one of the fire lab members that we are able to work with science, the wildfire science aspect. Also, one of the people that is partnering with us in our evacuation ingress egress risk assessment, Jason Mahagadis, is part of Spatial Informatics Group. He's mentioned in this research paper. And it's the acknowledgement that we really can't treat every inch of our landscape, but if we can do strategic landscape level projects, that there could be a significant decrease in the fire behavior. And they were actually, they have a test plot in, and that was tested by the American Fire back in 2013. And they were able to show that the treated area, even though it was predicted to have much higher fire behavior, had lower fire behavior than the untreated areas. And since that fire occurred in 2013, they were able to show the restoration that is occurring on that area that was treated, and the restoration is far better than the untreated area. So it's a fascinating research paper, and it shows that what we're doing is right. We are going in the right direction. We had a fantastic meeting hosted by Charlotte right behind me for our strategic ad hoc subcommittee working on our goals 1, 3, and 5. Goal 1, vegetation management. Goal 3 is grants. And goal 5 is our defensible space work. We are nailing down the metrics, and now we will work with a joint group of our advisory technical committee and operations committee to start coming up with our targets for those metrics. We will reconvene this committee once that is done, get their feedback, and then we'll bring those all back to the board. Regional priority plan had a meeting with CAL FIRE, Department of Conservation, and the Coastal Conservancy yesterday. Unfortunately, they're still struggling to figure out how to do the block grant process. However, the work that the Parks Conservancy has done with that regional priority plan is phenomenal. And they have applied for multiple grants through the CAL FIRE Forest Health grant stream. And I think that with the forest health strategy that's been put together and a regional priority plan, it really helps with them being able to be awarded that grant. And several of their projects intersect with our project. So it really is a cooperative effort. Did want to say that we did finalize the lease for our D-Space Consortium. They are right down the hall in room 270, down one floor. Anybody want to go take a look after the meeting? We'd be happy to take you over there. And then San Rafael invited me recently, thank you, Rachel, to their city council meeting to discuss their proposed work plan. I'll be visiting Ross in May, Novato on April 5th. And it's just an opportunity to talk about how the individual towns and districts are building with their partners in the MWPA, the work plan to accomplish the work that we're all supposed to be doing. Great coverage in the IJ. I really appreciated where they focused their quotes they put in there. I thought it was on target and in perfect alignment with our efforts. So if you'd like me or Ann to attend one of your meetings, I know Director Burke and I have been talking about attending Mill Valleys. Let's get that on the calendar. And the process of building a work plan is just good alignment and timing. And just wanted to I wanted to fill in the question marks that are on the staff report for the Greater Novato Shaded Fuel Break grant that we are requesting through CAL FIRE. We didn't have the matching amount at the time of publishing the staff report, so I wanted to include it today. We will be matching $500,000 a year, and the grant can be up to 5 years. So if we use the full 5 years for that grant, it'll go up to 2.5 million. Well within the budget space for the Novato zone to budget $500,000 a year for that project. And we will be asking for 5 million from that grant. And with that, I'll stop my screen share and take any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Before we get to questions, I'm going to pass it to Julie for one more note of appreciation.
Yes, this is employee appreciation. Is it month or week?
Month.
Okay, so I get to appreciate not only the MWPA employees, but also our wonderful consultants. So I'll start with the consultants with Bill Keene, Jean Bonender, Charlotte Jourdain, Megan Acevedo, Maria Weinberg, Lauren Wolf, Alyssa Schiffman, and Josh Hampshire. And then we have the MWPA has wonderful employees, starting with Mark Brown, Executive Officer, Ann Krelock, Planning and Program Manager, Martina Wilson, Management Analyst, Stephen Peters, Vegetation Management Specialist, and Maria Schmidt, former Grizzly Corps Fellow and Grant Specialist. So thank you all. Maybe we could join in a round of applause for I really can't imagine this organization operating as smoothly as it has been without all of you. So thank you.
Thank you, Julie. So now we'll take questions of Mark. Yes, Barbara, go ahead.
Yeah, Mark, I was just wondering, you provided the feedback on how much the MWPA will be contributing for that CAL FIRE grant. In the staff report, it also referenced that Novato Fire would be contributing. Are they planning on contributing as well?
I don't know if that number has been established yet, but we do know that we are working with Conservation Corps North Bay, who was awarded a grant for $374,000. So that we'll be able to combine those efforts.
Okay, so in the future, if we do get the grant, it would be good to know if Novato Fire will also be contributing, because I think from what I read in the staff report, if we get the grant, we can do the work faster. And it seems like if there were even more contributions, we might be able to do the work even faster.
Exactly. We'll follow up with that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Any other questions of Mark? Okay, we'll go to the public comment on this item then. Martina, please.
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, the executive officer's report, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those joining us by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself. And so there are no hands for public comment.
Thank you, Martina. Item 6 is a consent calendar. Opportunity for public comment on the consent calendar will occur prior to the board's decision of the consent calendar. The board may approve the entire consent calendar or with one action or remove items for discussion and separate vote. I'll now take public comment on the consent calendar. Looking here in the chamber first. Not seeing anyone. Martina, anyone online for the consent calendar comments?
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the consent calendar item, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those joining by phone, please press *9 and then *6. And there are no hands, sir.
All right. Do any board members wish to pull an item from the consent calendar? All right. If not, go ahead, Julie.
I just have a quick question, Mark, and that is on C, the amount for the environmental compliance has gone down. And I'm just wondering if you could briefly discuss why that's happening.
Great question. When we put the budget together for the environmental compliance, it was without full knowledge of how many projects would be proposed for the current work plan that we're in now. Also, we didn't know the balance of how many projects would be continuations from previous fiscal year and new projects for this fiscal year. So many of the projects are continuations that don't require much environmental compliance at all, or if at all. And for the new and emerging projects, we have created Anne has created efficiencies in working with Panorama. And the costs have actually decreased because of the efficiencies that have been created.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Yeah, Alexis, go ahead.
I have a question for Megan. I wasn't at the meeting on February 16th. So should I vote on the minutes or recuse myself?
If you watched the video, technically you could probably still vote on them to verify that they reflect, but if not, then I would not participate in that vote.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, can we have a motion to approve the consent calendar as presented, A through E?
So moved.
Motion.
Second, please.
I'll second it.
Hirsch made the motion and Casissa seconded that. So we're ready to move for a voice vote. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oppose, abstain. All right, the motion carries. Thank you. Item 7 is staff reports. And the first item is the March 2023 finance report.
Yes, hi. Oh, this is weird. I have to look at the camera over here. Okay. I have nothing new to report except for one feature on the report now. If you look on the revenue and expense report, we now indicate the percent that our admin costs are. So we're currently at 6%. And the board wants to stay within 10, although there are some rollover funds in there. So if we do exceed, that will be okay because it's using prior year funds, but we'll just keep you up to speed to that as the year progresses. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Questions? Yeah, Catherine.
I just want to make a comment that I really appreciate the more complete report this month. I really appreciated the revenue and expenditure detail. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for our consultant or Mark on this item? All right, we'll move to the public for public comment on the finance report.
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, the finance report, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those joining by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand. And then *6 to unmute yourself. And sir, there are no hands for comment.
Thank you. So we'll bring it back to the board for discussion. There's no action on this item. Thank you for your comments, Catherine. 7B is a work plan implementation update. Ann.
Thank you. I will go ahead and share my screen here. Great. So I am going to take a moment and discuss a little bit, go over the total acres and miles that were implemented during this last kind of work season. These are estimates. And then I'll talk about an upcoming public field trip, talk about another field trip that just took place with some state representatives, and then give you an update on development of the 23-24 work plan. So this slide is generally reflective of what was in your staff report here. The numbers are just slightly different due to the benefit of GIS and doing some calculations there. So generally, we've got around 2,800 acres of shaded field break and other vegetation management approved under CEQA, but that doesn't mean it's implemented yet. So I worked with the member agencies to see if we could tally up the acres that were actually implemented, and that's closer to around 1,100 acres. That's pretty good for a year. That's a lot of work. And then in addition, in terms of roads and fire roads, we've got around 570 acres or so that are approved. And we're looking at about 44 miles of roads implemented. And that all represents a ton of work, a lot of biological resources surveys and other surveys to support this work, a lot of contracting and a lot of time and effort on the part of our member agencies. So I wanted to report on that. I do have more specific numbers if anybody's interested in terms of project specific acres and miles implemented. We have a field trip, finally, if it doesn't rain, coming up on March 28th. So we're really excited to get back out in the field with our partners. We'll be co-hosting with Marin County Fire and also our environmental stakeholders with ESP Partnership, the Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership. We're also going to be joined by National Park Service staff because they have lands directly adjacent to the project area and are very supportive of the project, and are kind of inspired to do some work in that area as well. And we have the Marin Housing Authority taking part as well, because this directly benefits some of the lower income housing in this area, and they're very excited about this project. So hopefully received an email and flyer with more information about this field trip. We're hoping that weather is good, and if it's pouring, we will cancel and try to find a new date, but fingers crossed. We had another field trip with members of the State Water Resources Control Board and the Regional Water Quality Control Board. So the state board prepared a general order to help support the California Vegetation Treatment Program, EIR. So that was coordination with among different state agencies to support protection of water quality while also increasing the pace and scale of fire fuels management around the state. So staff is now tasked with visiting projects all around the state and actually showing up and walking project areas with staff. And we were their first tour around the state. So really happy to have them join us. We hosted them for a full day tour. They showed us, generally on a map where they wanted to see, and really it was centered around waterways and where project areas overlapped water courses. We hosted 3 members of staff from the state board and 1 member from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and had a really great day. And they were very impressed and actually felt like it was going to be a hard act to follow. So we were thrilled to have them, and I think we'll see them in the future coming and checking in and visiting again. So here's a group photo at the end of the day. Also want to thank Marin County Parks and Open Space staff who met us out there as well and helped us share what we're doing. So in my last slide, I just want to mention that the ATC and operations committees have been very, very busy. If you missed it, there were a lot of presentations at this month's meetings. On the March 8th operations committee meeting and the March 1st advisory technical committee meeting, we heard a ton of great presentations about JPA-wide proposals that are being included as in a draft form for the next work plan. So currently the advisory technical committee and operations committees are both considering those and kind of thinking through the details and thinking through the budget. And so next month in April, we'll be thinking through the more zone specific or agency specific projects. And that's it for me. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ann. Questions of Ann or her report? Catherine.
So, excuse me, I went through everything this morning. So are you still reporting on the work plan implementation update, or is that later on in?
Work plan implementation includes the acreages and miles in
Okay.
that table. Yeah.
All right. So as part of that, there was information about the coastal zone coordination.
Mhm.
And if you could elaborate on that at some point, where that's going and more specific about timelines, what projects we're looking at with the
Mhm.
Coastal Commission, et cetera. I think more information would be beneficial.
Sure, I can elaborate on that right now.
Okay.
We met with the California Coastal Commission staff yesterday just to talk about potential measures that would be included in a public works plan in the future. Also met with county planning staff to think through that coordination, because whatever we do through the public works plan process also needs to be consistent with the local coastal program. So there's going to be a lot of engagement and a lot of collaboration moving forward, including kind of crosswalking measures in the local coastal program with measures in the public works plan. So we've also been meeting with potential partners that may or may not be part of this public works plan. And there are still a lot of questions to be answered, but it's been a really great conversation so far. So in our last meeting with the Coastal Commission staff, we were informed that they lost another staff member. So there's only one ecologist covering the entire coastline of California right now. So it is a bit of a challenge. So we've had our ambitious timeline checked a little bit. So we'll see. We don't know how long it's going to take, but it's going to take some time for the state to address not only our public works plan, but the other public works plans around the state.
Great. Thank you for that. That's all I have.
Okay, thank
Other
you.
questions? Yeah, Catherine.
When I looked at the charts, even though I represent Southern Marin, I noticed there were very few projects in West Marin. Only one, Bolinas, or some, I just want, and I want to know, I'm wondering if that's because we're not getting applications from the area. And in that case, are we giving them enough help? Is there nothing to do out there? I'm just curious about
I don't think that's.
what is the
I think
reason?
we're done in West Marin. No, we've been working through kind of a long-term strategy for West Marin, and a lot of that involves, the public works plan process and that timeline, and incorporating that timeline into our planning for West Marin. So some of the conversations we've had with West Marin agencies are, given the extent of the environmental compliance required for anything to happen in West Marin, what are our short-term and long-term strategies to get as much done as we can? So some of the shorter-term work that could take place would be collaboration with National Park Service, because their compliance is already complete under NEPA. and their own fire management plans. So some collaboration there is great. They're very willing and fantastic partners. They're also short-staffed. But we are working with them on some projects that could take place in the shorter term. And then for the longer term, we're working with the member agencies to think through, what is the wish list? What does that look like? Not just for year 1, but maybe for year 5 and 6 and all of that. So one of the ideas is to put together kind of a scoping and environmental compliance project for that wish list, whatever that ends up looking like. So that may be the immediate next step for some of these areas. And then once we have that public works plan in place and we have the CEQA completed, then we can start implementing more projects in West Marin. But we do have a project that's being implemented. Marin County Fire has been working in the Inverness area and very slowly and carefully and very, very light touch do some roadside evacuation route work. So a little over a mile of that has been implemented at this point, and every step of that project is surveyed by a biologist and flagged before any leaf is touched. So it's a very slow, deliberate implementation process, but it's happening little by little.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I would just add that there's a lot of defensible space work going on out there, including inspections, and Claire and Mark or Catherine, please add into that if you want. So they're doing a lot of that house out approach because that's easier for us on the coast.
And we also have chipper days happening in West Marin, quite a lot of that. And Mark reminded me, we have a local project in the Stinson Beach area that we were able to support. And actually one of our Grizzly Corps fellows, Andrea, was able to do the environmental compliance for that because we already had a template for work on federal land and we were able to use that. So there are definitely activities happening in West Marin.
Yeah, Mark, and Barbara, I'll get you a question in a minute.
Oh. Now I'm on. Okay. Yes. And the shaded fuel break has been completed and we're very, very thankful about it. It looks really good. I'm telling people to go up and look at it, and they're going up and doing it. And one of the problems with us, obviously, is lack of financing that we have in West Marin. We don't have that much. We get very little. Inverness will say that's true. Bolinas will say that's true too. If Paul was here, he would say that as well. So, but we're doing as good a job as we can. And with the help of everyone, it's really going to work out well, I think, for all of us.
Right. Catherine, you want to go next?
Yes, not to belabor this point on West Marin, but thank you, Catherine, for that. I just want to say that what I hear from my constituents in Inverness is that they would like to apply for the grant monies, but a lot of the folks that live in Inverness just don't really have the means or the knowledge or the wherewithal to really figure out how to go about that process. And as you know, the volunteer fire department has very limited means as far as helping that out. We've talked about, going to the library and those of us on the board going and helping with that. And I even thought maybe about a Grizzly fellow coming out, but that has been kind of the feedback that I've gotten from a lot of elderly folks out there that just want to have a grant to harden their home, but they just really don't have the energy or the means to be able to figure it out. I'm just giving you that feedback.
Claire, would you like to add anything?
I was just going to echo what you said about the chipper days being incredibly successful in Bolinas. I think people have really taken that opportunity. And then as we look at bigger term projects, it's the environmental compliance and then also just the resources within, small agencies of executing that. So those are the challenges.
Hey, Barbara, questions?
Yeah, so I worked for the state for a couple of decades and it's really hard to hire. And I'm wondering if there's any kind of bridge thing we could do, which is we pay for a contract ecologist we don't direct, that they direct for a short bridge, because it's going to take a while for them to fill that position. And, state agencies are very difficult, much different than local and county to get things done. There's a lot of rules, but I think that might be something that might be worth looking into, because I know it's gonna delay probably for years till they can get someone and then get someone trained up.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and a great idea. There have been some ideas around supporting National Park Service, for example, in that capacity as well, to help move projects forward that overlap federal lands. And I think it's really something that we should be looking into. Just preliminary, hey, what about this idea? Conversations are starting now, actually. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
And if,
Catherine, want to follow up? Mark, did you want to say something?
if we're staying on the West Marin topic, I'll wait till you're all done. I have some extra information to talk about for West Marin.
Okay. Catherine, do you want to follow up with a question?
Yes, I just want to say thank you very much. I asked the question thinking that the resources weren't there and how can we help? And was the purpose. And I'm really happy to hear about the shaded fuel break activity, the chipper days, and all these successes, because clearly it wasn't in the charts for the others, but that was my intention. And so maybe we ought to think about that, our constituents in that area and how we can help. Thanks.
Thanks, Catherine. Rachel?
My question's a little bit more general. Thank you for the data. I'm looking at table 1 and I'm wondering, based on your report of it, it sounds like things are going great. But if I just look at the data, it's hard to tell. And as we're looking at, and expanding our metrics around this work, I think it would be helpful if there's a way to look at it, to know, like with West Marin, like in terms of the evacuation routes, that's probably all that we've been able to do based on what you've just said. And I don't know if there's a way going forward to add in some of that, either another metric or what we're approved to be able to get done or something, so that we can look at that a little bit more holistically in terms of whether this is good or bad. Because going back to look at this, I think somebody might question, like, was that a good thing or not a good? Are we on track or not on track?
In the strategic planning ad hoc committee meeting, we did discuss precisely that. What are we measuring? Are we measuring progress in raw numbers, comparing different zones or agencies, or are we measuring regulatory barriers? So we've had some discussions around that, and I think it's a challenging thing to measure, but we've got a really great contractor working on that who understands these issues. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Julie?
Just a general comment. I like the notion of helping people apply for grants, and maybe we should do a little pilot program in West Marin, a workshop on an afternoon or an evening, and then we can see how it goes and then roll it out more broadly. Although it seems like certain zones, we have robust participation with the grants, but I don't think it would hurt to make ourselves available.
Other
So-
comments, Fred?
Yeah, just to piggyback off one thing Rachel said, maybe what you could do if possible on some of the charts, if you can add in maybe like where it says estimated area treated, if you added in a total that we're looking at treating and then a percentage, because this way we could see that we know that there's, West Marin has 5 acres, you've done 2.5, and we know 50% is done. Because I think it's important. I think there's like 1105 that's been done. But if I knew that that's 50% what we're targeting, I think that really helps. So I'm making it sound easy. I know it's time and effort, but just, something total and then a percentage of what's been done. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Fred. Any other questions, comments from directors? Right, anyone online, Martina?
If you don't mind,
Oh, go ahead, Mark. I'm sorry.
just a couple things on the whole aspect of what we've heard from this great West Marin conversation. And one of the presentations you're going to hear today is the wildfire risk perception survey, and that we've been able to reach out to some of our West Marin communities as focus groups. And so perhaps we can use those contacts that we have made through the Wildfire Risk Perception Survey to help with the education surrounding grants. But speaking of grants and chipper days, actually, the use of grants and chipper days is outpacing the West Marin per capita is outpacing the other 4 zones. So we do have pretty good penetration. But the feedback that you're giving us is actually common throughout all 5 of our zones. And so that tells us that we need to improve that. And then as far as the dollar figure that's available for West Marin, what we've instituted this year is we are telling each of the 5 zones to target 80% of their revenue for their projects. And then we've created a 20% of the core budget set aside for priority projects. The Advisory Technical Committee and the Operations Committee will prioritize the remaining projects so we can spend the money or spend our resources, I should say, where they are most important to be spent.
Thank you, Mark. Can we go to the public for public comment, Martina, please? I see no one in the chamber.
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the work plan implementation update, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those joining us by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself. And so there are no hands for comment.
Thank you. So seeing no further comments, bring it back to the directors for discussion. No action is required on this. All right, we'll move on to item 8, which are action items. The first one is MWPA Consumer Price Index tax rate adjustment.
Yes, so the tax ordinance does allow a cost of living or CPI adjustment every year up to 3%. One thing to note that there is no banking clause. So this year we just found out 2 days ago that the CPI is 5.3%. We can only max that out at 3%. That doesn't mean that 2.3 can be banked for future use for our adjustment. The max we can ever do is 3%. As a background also as well, our first year, we opted not to exercise the cost of living or the CPI adjustment because quite frankly, we hadn't spent very much of our money and it didn't seem appropriate. And with the pandemic and the economic status, that wasn't an appropriate move. Last year, we did recommend and the board did approve a 3% increase. And again, staff is recommending this year to exercise the 3% increase. We have seen a dramatic increase in the cost of our work. Our biggest project, which gives us the best example of the cost, is the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break, and those costs are far exceeding what were predicted. And that is because of the labor costs increasing. Also, our member agencies have increased the bandwidth within their organizations, and we are on track to expend most of the revenue, if not all, that we have been afforded by our tax measure this year. The balance sheet may show some that we're not quite on track at 68% through the fiscal year, but we know that there's invoices coming that will catch us up. So with all of that information, and like I said, the February CPI came out 2 days ago at 5.3%. And the Finance Committee did review this, and the Finance Committee is recommending to the board the approval for the 3% CPI adjustment.
Thank you, Mark. So questions of Mark. Catherine?
In dollars and cents, what are we all paying now and what would a 3% increase mean?
On average, we are getting about $200 per resident per year. So 3% would be very much $6. $6.
Okay.
And it averages to about a $600,000 increase to our budget.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Other questions?
Yeah,
Brad?
just one quick, I know the dollar amounts may be minimal, but how do you, if we pass this, how do you promote it to the public so somebody doesn't get their tax bill and go, oh my God, why did this go up?
I think the example of 5.3% is the CPI compared to our 3% increase, and then the track record that we've created with knowing how much we're paying.
Other questions? Okay, we'll go to
My
go ahead, Catherine.
question, President, is that, so what are you asking us? You're asking us to approve this? Or your recommendation is to approve this so that we're going to ask the taxpayers to include it for a tax increase. Is that what I'm hearing?
It actually probably is request the assessor, Department of Finance to increase the tax roll for us by 3%. So your tax bill will reflect that in the fall. Is that correct, Mark?
That is correct.
So there's no further request beyond this. We approve it. It goes to your tax bill and they add the 3% on to last year's in the new tax bill.
And-
So my thought is we need some more discussion with that because I know the sensitivity of increasing the tax bill is going to be fraught with some concern.
So Gabe had his hand up first. Go ahead, Gabe.
Yeah, thank you. Mark, sorry, the numbers again, you said that the 3% would give us $600,000.
That's correct. And it would be, the average per household is $200.
Okay.
So if we had the 3% increase, then it would be average, it would be a $6, on average, a $6 increase for the property tax
Okay.
bill.
So we're not allowed, all things being equal, 5.3% means that we're not realizing about $450,000. And I'm curious on the budgetary side, sort of the opposite tack is, have we worked through what shortfalls we might have, because everything else has gone up, including labor.
It just decreases our pace and scale of our projects by that $600,000, which is, to put it in perspective, we have spent just about 2 million already on the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break. So you look at what 600,000 would mean to that 2 million is significant.
So what this might mean is delays. So within our budget, we get the money, but we get it later. So whatever we had slated to be completed this year might take that much longer, because the money just isn't there.
That's correct. And one of the concerns staff has is the compounding aspects of it.
Okay. And these increases were voted by the voters, right? This was already something that we agreed to, and we had it capped with no bank. So the voters were clearly aware that this could happen.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Gabe. Who is next? I'm sorry.
I was, but
Rachel, go
Gabe
ahead.
covered most of the points that I was going to address.
Mark?
Yeah, I think if you look at 3%, most everything that you buy is much more than that. That's 6 to 10%. I don't care if you're grocery shopping, gasoline shopping, car shopping, or whatever. I think people are going to look and say, that's not so bad. And it's for a good cause, obviously. So I'd be in favor of this resolution.
Julie?
I agree with those comments. It kind of strikes me also that in the future, we probably should not increase. We should always increase because if we miss a year, we can't ever get it back. And also, it seems like every other tax that I look at on my bill is going up 3%. Or if they're smart, they had a CPI clause instead, and then it would go up 5.3%. So 3% is really a good deal in light of what the CPI is.
Any other questions? Yes, Barry. Yeah. Thank you, Barry. Yeah, we just add that the base tax, I believe, can go up 1% a year under Prop 13. So that's the biggest change you would see. Everything else is pretty minor underneath it, but and I'm not sure how much attention each homeowner pays to each line item, how much it was last year and the following year, but this is a pretty small increase. I think the only thing I ask is good faith with the voters is we should be spending the budget before we do this increase the year before. If we're saving money and we're building up a reserve, I don't feel comfortable saying that the rate should go up. So that's my only question. I know the finance committee may have talked about that. It's just not an automatic. It's how well you're performing too. Are you spending the money and not banking it? So Rachel, go ahead.
I'll just comment from the finance committee's perspective. We do know that some projects are going to need a lot of funding. And so we can't just use the reserve as one, it's one indicator, but it's not the only indicator. It's really the expense of the projects.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, so we're going to go to public comment on this item. Seeing, oh, great. No, go ahead, Barbara.
Just one comment. We didn't increase it the first year that we could because of COVID, but also following on what you just said, President Rodoni, is we also weren't spending the money down. And so now we're at a fast clip. I'm totally supportive of this. It's a small amount and we're still going to be behind with all the projects we have in the hopper and all the new ones. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Public comment online on this item?
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the Consumer Price Index tax rate adjustment for the 23-24 year, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those joining by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself. And so there are no hands for comment.
Okay, so seeing no more comments, we'll bring it back to the board for further discussion and or a motion to adopt the proposed resolution.
I'll move that.
Thank you.
Second.
Moved by Kohler, second by Kirsch. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Anyone want to abstain? All right, that motion carries. 8B, consider adoption of resolution approving the third amendment to the executive officer at will employment agreement. The following statements required to be read by the Brown Act. This proposed action will amend the executive director Mark Brown's employment agreement with MWPA to increase his salary by 6%, retroactive to November 1st, 2022, and establish a 3-year term for this agreement. MPA negotiator Gene Bonetter will provide a staff report on this item. Welcome, Gene.
Thank you, President Rodoni. Is this working?
Yep.
Thank you very much. And before I start, I just want to express my appreciation for all your earlier comments today. It really is a pleasure to work with you all and hear such kind remarks. Thank you. So what we have before you today is the third evaluation for Mark Brown. He was hired, which is #1 evaluation, and he's had 2 evaluations since. And the evaluations have been positive. So working with the executive committee, they are forwarding a recommendation that the President Rodoni read to you, a 6% salary adjustment retroactive to November of 2022, which was the higher date for Mark starting in 2020. And there is an additional $300 adjustment to the in lieu. So the total roll up is about 7.4%. So just a couple of highlights. The executive committee is recommending a 3-year agreement. And part of this is to encourage and ensure the stability in this position and going forward to carry out the work. And that this is also does not conflict with the at-will agreement portion, which is the position that Mark holds. In other words, this doesn't commit either party. It just is the intention is to continue to support stability in the position. So and as part of the 3-year agreement, we're converting to from a November evaluation to a fiscal year evaluation. So for future discussions of compensation and evaluation processes will be on a fiscal year basis starting on July 1st of each year. So with that, the last thing I'd note is that this is a position that is also subject to comparisons as best we could make them, because this is a unique position. There are no other MWPAs in California or beyond. And so the executive committee looked at comparables as best they could and have identified that that this process will lead toward getting the position, the executive officer position to where the executive committee and hopefully the board thinks it ought to be in the long run. So since my voice is running out, I'm going to stop talking. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And the recommendation before you from the executive committee is to adopt the resolution enacting this adjustment. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. And just to remind the board that we had a couple closed sessions in the executive committee and one closed session as a board on this item already. So welcome any questions for Jean.
President Rodoni, one further comment. There are no changes from what was discussed in the closed session in the recommendations or the language. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Barry?
And I don't think anybody in this room is unhappy with Mark's performance. And I think we're all pretty delighted with his performance. And I am very happy to support the increase.
Thank you, Barry. Any other comments or questions? All right, we're going to go to the public. First in the chamber. Seeing no one. Martina, anyone online want to comment on this item?
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the resolution approving the third amendment to the executive officer's employment agreement, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those joining us by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself. And sir, there are no hands at this time.
Okay, bringing it back to the board for further discussion and or motion to adopt the proposed resolution.
I'm happy to move as a motion.
Second.
So we have a motion. Motion by Kerr, second by Hilliard.
I wasn't fast.
Motion by Kerr, second by Hilliard. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oppose, abstain. Okay, that motion passes. We have a new contract with our executive officer. Thank you.
May I make just a real brief statement? Thank you for letting me continue my public service. I really am a public servant at heart. And I find this work so rewarding and I love my job.
Thank you, Mark. Going to move on to item 9, which is committee reports. Fire Safe Marin.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Everybody has the report. There's a lot of information in the report. I'll just give a very high level summary. We've been really busy, a lot of new assets for the Adapt to Wildfire PSA campaign. You can see there's links to new videos, static images, and so forth in there. We're kind of excited about it. This is a campaign that typically reaches about 1.5 million eyes of Marin residents every month. We have a couple of new print materials that are out there. A newly revived wildfire survival checklist, which we're kind of excited about, and a wildfire preparedness calendar. Those will all be available in the cache. Again, they're a print product, but of course they can be downloaded from the website also. I don't really talk enough about this. I probably should do more. We do collaborate a lot with community partners. And we've been very excited about the risk perception survey because we're an active participant in that and attend the meetings. And we've actually had a chance to engage more partner agencies and we've been doing follow-up with them. So it's great. We're very excited about that project. I think it's been good all the way around. A lot of work on the website, several things that are really in draft that haven't quite been released yet, but you'll see, I hope by next month to be able to highlight a couple of pretty major improvements that are coming to that. A lot of work with the Firewise community, lots of messages going out on social media. You'll see the information on that below. Hopefully you're all subscribed to some of that. And then lastly, Ember Stomp, it's going to be, as I keep saying, bigger and better. I hope you'll all be there. And with that, I'm glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rich. Questions, Rich? Catherine?
Not a question, just thank you so much, Rich. I mean, I'm getting all these emails and the website looks great and it's, you're fantastic at being with and in the community. And I get feedback because of what you do in my area. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Julie?
Rich, what is the date and the time for Ember Stomp?
So Saturday, May 20th, the gates, as we say, open at 11 and we end at 5. And obviously it's at the Marin Civic Center. We have the whole fairgrounds this year. It's going to be very large. You'll really have to check out the landscape exhibits. They're massive this year. Exciting bands. And we have, I think, I looked today, we have 42 participating agencies and about close to 20 vendors of wildfire products and services, music, bands, the whole bit. There's a lot more than there was last year.
Thank you, Rich. Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll go to the public in the chamber. No public here. Martina online.
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those joining us by phone, please press *9. And for the Fire Safe Marin report, we do have a comment from Stephen Keys.
Thank you. Welcome, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you. I continue to marvel at how much Fire Safe Marin, together with Mark and you all, have been able to do in Marin and pioneering examples and role models nationwide, maybe globally. And the fact that Fire Safe Marin has been in existence since right after the Oakland fire and has helped create the environment, the expectation of excellence. And it's clear that this is happening. I'd like to mention one thing, and that is that the Ember Stomp has inspired the Cascade Canyon Firewise group to hold an evacuation drill or practice, whatever we want to call it, ending with showing up at the Ember Stomp. And I think it's going to inspire us to have much more participation than we've been able to drum up in the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else, Martina?
If there are any additional members of the public wishing to speak on the Fire Safe Marin report, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those joining us by phone, please press *9. And it looks like we do have a comment from Larry Minikis. Welcome, Larry.
As a participant last year, I just want to say, just really excited to see Ember Stomp coming back this year, bigger and better than ever, and hope that we're doing lots of outreach to get maximum amount of people there. Thank you.
And Martina, you can identify the speaker for the minutes, correct? I didn't hear his name, so.
Oh, my apologies, sir. That was Larry Minikis.
Thank you.
And
Any
if there
other?
are any additional members of the public wishing to speak on the Fire Safe Marin report, please raise your hand in the reactions. It looks like the only hand we have is Rich's hand, sir.
So I just wanted to follow up, thank you, on Stephen's comment. This idea of having evacuation drills and then encouraging the people at the Alert Marin notice to go to Ember Stomp is something that we're really excited about. And we're working with several agencies on that, including the Nevada Fire Department. And we had a bigger discussion with a number of agencies throughout Marin about this today. So you may hear quite a bit more about that. I think that's just a really good idea. And we really are publicizing the event much more aggressively this year than we did last year. So you'll be seeing materials come out to you, posters, et cetera, advertising the event. So get the word out. We really appreciate it. And thank you for the nice comments about that.
Right, bringing it back to the board, no actions required. Other comments? Move to item B then, Advisory Technical Committee.
I'll be providing the update on the Advisory Technical Committee. The ATC met on March 1st to hear presentations on draft JPA-wide proposals. And the Advisory Technical Committee has a ad hoc subcommittee who's really diving into the details of those proposals and different ideas, and reviewed all of the draft proposals. At this point, we'll be moving on to start reviewing JPA rather than JPA-wide proposals, but zone-specific and agency-wide proposals coming up at the end of this month and early April.
Okay, questions of Ann about the ATC? Any public comment on this item? None in the chamber? Or Tina, anyone online?
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the ATC committee report, Advisory Technical Committee, please raise your hand in the reactions or press *9 to raise your hand if you're joining by phone. And sir, there are no comments.
Thank you. Bring it back to the board for final thoughts. No action is required. Okay, we'll move to item C, Operations Committee.
Great. Jesse Perry did send some comments along for this item. He's the chair of the Operations Committee. He writes, the Operations Committee meeting took place on March 8th, during which various organizations and agencies presented JPA-wide project proposals for inclusion in the upcoming fiscal year's budget. The Ops Committee is currently reviewing these proposals and will provide recommendations to the MWPA board. And I would just add that there's an ad hoc subcommittee for the Operations Committee who's really diving into the details of all of these proposals as well.
Terrific. Questions of Ann on behalf of Jesse? Catherine.
If they're both doing the same work, they're getting the same proposals, but they're doing it from a different perspective. Is that what I hear? So it can't be done simultaneously. It has to be done one first and then the other.
Yeah, generally the flow of work is that the Advisory Technical Committee proposes projects, considers them, tweaks them a little bit, and the Operations Committee then meets as well and considers the same projects, but provides additional input and, you know, makes choices in terms of budget and allocation and all of that. So there has been a sequence of events. They're just all packed together in our time frame.
Other questions? All right, we'll go to the public for public comment.
If
Does it
there are
look
any,
like- Go ahead.
if there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the Operations Committee report, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those joining by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and then *6 to unmute yourself. And so there are no comments.
Thank you. And I don't see anyone in the chamber wishing to comment on this. We'll bring it back to the board for final thoughts. No action is required. Very good. Thank you. Look forward to seeing Jesse come and report at some point. Our young fire chief from Stinson. So thank you. Informational items, evacuation, egress, ingress, risk assessment.
That's a mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll open this up and then I'll pass it off to Tammy. And we were planning on this presentation to be right around here anyway, but we did receive a request from the board for this to be an agenda item. So here we are. The evacuation ingress egress risk assessment is a first of its kind study. It's very complicated. We had very high expectations and we asked a very short timeline for deliverables from the team that was putting this together. Happy to say it's on time, on budget, and exceeding expectations. We also, the team proposed what they were calling a technical advisory team. And I really appreciate, and Tammy's going to dig into this a little bit as well. I really appreciate the feedback that we received from the TAT. It's been vital. They pushed all the assumptions that we had through this entire process, and it truly has made this a better product. And it wasn't just a law enforcement or fire personnel in the TAT, it was fire, law, community development, and public works. And quite frankly, some of the public works feedback we got, I think, made this product even better. And when we mentioned this to other jurisdictions that we have such a product, not just within the state, but within state nationwide, they go, wow, wish we had this. And this really also will support our development of goal 2, which is evacuation system improvements. This will help develop the metrics and then the targets for this improvement. And I'm so happy to pass this over to Tammy so she can present to you our second update for the evacuation ingress egress risk assessment.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Mark. And good afternoon, everyone. Happy to see everybody getting together in meeting spaces again. Let's see, I'll share my screen. So I've got a lot to cover today, and hopefully it'll be interesting and satisfying. But really, I just wanted to give a general overall update on kind of where we're at with the project and share some examples from the modeling that we've done, and to also talk about how we're compiling and using the information to develop a really nice toolkit and set of information that can be used to develop mitigation action projects. So before I present this, I always sort of start with a reminder that, you know, the overall objective of this project is to identify evacuation route vulnerability. And what we've learned through this project is that it's not only related to traffic and traffic congestion or fire, you know, moving toward roadways, but it also relates to how people receive their alerts and information, the decisions that they make around deciding to evacuate or not, and demographics and all kinds of other things that we've learned throughout the study. And then really taking all of the information from the literature review that we did early on, and the modeling, and then just the wealth of GIS data that's available for Marin. It's quite impressive. I work on a lot of studies, and I feel like Marin County has some of the best data I think I've ever seen. So, but taking all of that data and really distilling it down to understand what are those factors that are really contributing to risk, and then what can we do to reduce that risk. The outcomes from the project are intended for use to help inform mitigation projects and prioritization. And so I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And just a reminder, this is not a real-time evacuation management tool. It's not for making decisions, you know, on the fly during an evacuation. It's really for planning to facilitate more smooth evacuations and reducing the risk around those. So I showed this slide when I gave my last update, but just as a quick reminder, we started the project back in around the beginning of May 2022. We've completed a lot of work since then, as Mark mentioned. We started out with the literature review, which I presented most of the findings from that during the last update. We completed an extensive data review, as I just alluded to, and identified some really just great data sets. And then from there, we moved into doing all of the modeling and analysis work to model different evacuation scenarios. So different scenarios related to locations of fires, different times of day under different weather conditions. We combined all that information together with existing contextual data layers, and now we're starting to distill down the information that we're learning and turn it into a nice package that people can use for decision making. Future phases of the project will focus on taking all of the data that we've developed. We have a really rich data ball, data sandwich of GIS map layers and all kinds of interesting information, and turning that into a software application within a GIS framework that people can use for their project planning. And so right now we're just finishing up the modeling tasks. As Mark mentioned earlier, early in the project, we recruited members across different agencies in Marin, and Mark touched on this already, but we've engaged with them throughout the project, really at sort of each milestone. We engaged with them during the literature and data review to get their input and feedback on what we learned from those tasks. And all throughout the modeling, we've actually had quite a lot of engagement. For our traffic modeling, which I'll talk about in a moment, we focused on 5 test areas where we wanted to test out our modeling system and different fire and demographic environments, different fuels environments, and to see how the models performed and to see what we could learn from that to expand to the county. Through that process, we had separate meetings with the technical advisory team members from each of the test areas. And as Mark said, they provided feedback that was just really invaluable in helping to shape not only our modeling process, but how to use the information coming out of the study. And just as a quick reminder, I talked about this last time, but just as a memory refresher, we performed an extensive data and literature review before we started the modeling. And the reason we wanted to do this is because we know that a lot has changed in the evacuation dynamic space over the last few years since the campfire. There's a lot more focus on, evacuation planning and trying to understand what the issues are and risks are around evacuations. And so we wanted to look out in the literature and the documentation that was out there to see what we could learn to inform the modeling that we did. And one of the big questions that we had going into that was, what are the contributors to civilian injuries and fatalities during evacuations? What are the sort of geographic conditions? What are the decision conditions that contribute to fatalities? And what we generally learned at a high level, we learned a lot through the study, but what some of the big nuggets are, people decide, some people just don't receive notifications in time to evacuate, or they don't perceive a threat. They might not understand the difference between an evacuation warning and an evacuation order. And so there's a lot to be gleaned from the literature review around that, and age and demographics have a lot to do with that sort of risk perception and receiving and interpreting notifications or not. And then another big thing that we learned is that a lot of people who do not, or who evacuate late or choose not to, is simply because they don't have the ability to mobilize quickly. They might have health issues or lack of access to vehicles. And so this was an important thing that we learned. And again, they don't perceive an immediate threat until it's too late. And, we found, if you go back and look at the data, particularly for the campfire, but we looked at other studies in Australia and other areas, and people don't tend to die in their cars on unobstructed roadways. Most of the fatality data shows us that people die on their properties because they didn't leave in time and were overcome. So what's the takeaway there? Unobstructed roadways, so unblocked roadways with vegetation clearance, defensible buildings can provide temporary safe areas. And so this was something that we wanted to look at when we actually did our own modeling for Marin. And again, we used the information from the literature review to inform the modeling and set up the models and run them for the test areas. So just a quick overview on the modeling that we did. We worked with a team from UC Berkeley and a team from Spatial Informatics Group, SIG, to run dynamic fire, communication, and traffic models. And these are fairly complicated models, but hopefully I can simplify the explanation here. So the first thing we start with is we define our test areas. We've had those figured out early on. And then within those test areas, we looked at fire history, burn probability, local knowledge of the fire environment in those areas. And we said, okay, we had to choose ignition locations. And we said, if a fire were to occur here, or a fire were to occur here at this time of day, under these weather conditions, what would that look like? And then we overlaid that fire modeling information with what we call the communication model, which has embedded information about demographics, different age groups, clusters of vulnerable populations, such as elderly people or people who might not be able to mobilize quickly. And we said, okay, well, now we have a fire in this area. This is what we know about how people receive their communication and alerts and how long it takes them to mobilize. And then we worked with our partners, Fair and Peers, who developed the transportation demand model for Marin, and said, okay, let's put those vehicles now onto the road network and see how long it takes for them to get to safe locations. But also let's identify where are the congestion points and bottlenecks. And then also what are the risk factors that contribute to the delays and exposure to encroaching fire. And then specifically, where are the most vulnerable road segments throughout the network. So now I want to switch gears a little bit and just show some of the examples of the types of data and information that we're getting out of the modeling and how we're using those to develop this mitigation toolkit that I'll talk about in just a moment. So what you're looking at here is one of our test areas was Fairfax. And if you think about Fairfax, for those of you that know the area, there are a lot of schools in Fairfax and not a lot of roads providing egress from those schools. And working with the team from UC Berkeley and what we learned from the literature review, again, we thought, you know, if a fire were to occur in the afternoon, say 3 o'clock when schools are getting out, that would be a problem for traffic. And so we ran a simulation that included, it's like I have to move my video panel, that included ignition points that are in this area highlighted in black. And if you're familiar with Fairfax, this is sort of the downtown area. So this is sort of to the northeast area of Fairfax. And there are 3 schools located in this general space. And then over here goes into Sleepy Hollow. And so the way that we run the fire model is we do what's called the Monte Carlo simulation. We run 100 fire simulations. And what you're looking at here is the burn frequency. So in this particular instance, if you simulate 100 fires, the dark red or dark orange area in the center burns 80 to 100% of the time. And then as you move away from that, it burns less frequently. But basically the way that you interpret this is for this ignition zone, your highest burn frequency are going to be these sort of darker colors. And that might be where you want to consider doing mitigation work ahead of a fire to try and reduce the likelihood that area would ignite and spread. And I'm going to come back to this in just a sec. So the next thing that we did, we simulate fire growth over a 24-hour time period. So we have a fire starting at 3 in the afternoon, and we run the fire simulation model for 24 hours. So what you're seeing here, and this is just a looping video, is for the same fire footprint that I showed before, you see the ignition time, and then you get different fire starting. That's because our modeling takes into account ember cast and ember spread. So, and then what we've also done here is we've overlaid the fire footprint with the road network, which are shown in the thin black lines, and then also with what are called MAZ zones. So you can think about these as census blocks that have information about the types of people that live in the different zones and how long it might take for them to get notified and leave during an evacuation. The other thing that the traffic model tells us is how long is the total travel time from a community to a safe shelter. And so in this example, we use the Civic Center and the fairgrounds as the destination point. And in general, and if in context, it takes people anywhere from 2 to 4 to 5 hours during this time of day to get over there. And that's obviously not an absolute number. You have to take into account what groups are leaving, what's the traffic congestion and so forth. But this is the type of information that the modeling is giving us. So going back to the burn frequency map that I showed a moment ago, another way that we're using the fire modeling data is by overlaying the fire growth footprint with the planned vegetation management projects. So what this map is showing now is the same burn frequency map, But now we have overlaid the greater Ross Valley shaded fuel break and this kind of dark red, and then some other proposed fuel reduction projects throughout. And it's pretty remarkable how well this this lines up. And then you can start to identify areas where, oh, well, we might want to consider some mitigation in this area, maybe expand this fuel reduction project here, and so forth. And so we're getting just a lot of really, really interesting and useful information. So moving along, another example. This is showing you a map of one of our other test areas, Tam Valley. And we've overlaid the fire simulation model. And what you can see here, this is actually showing data from the traffic modeling. And it's showing the different colors represent the change in speed along the roadways as people start to evacuate and move up to the Civic Center to the safe location. One thing that we have been looking at, as we get into the details of analyzing the model results, is if you have more safe locations, temporary safe locations, or temporary parking areas where you can route traffic to allow congestion to decrease and then filter more cars onto the road. These are mitigation strategies that can be very effective in reducing the time it takes for people to get to their ultimate destination. I should mention a minor detail, but the fire model does not take into account any type of suppression. So this just assumes if you had let the fire grow for 20 or 24 hours, which would likely not be the case. So switching gears again a little bit. So we did a whole bunch of model runs, and we also have a lot of GIS data about the fuels, the slope, topography, weather. As I mentioned, we've done modeling as part of the CWPP effort to look at fire hazard and flame lengths and rate of spread of fires. And so we wanted to integrate the wealth of data that we already have with the modeling results. And so one of the data layers that we produced shows a relative risk ranking for each road segment throughout the county based on the topographic characteristics of the roadway. So elevation, slope, number of intersections, the building density along the road buffer, which is an indicator of how many people would need to use that road for egress. And then we looked at some of the fire hazard indicators, so flame length and rate of spread and so forth. And what you can do using GIS technology is combine all of those data layers together to come up with a composite relative risk ranking or scoring for each road segment. And from there, you can start to drill down and look at what are the factors that are contributing to those higher ranked roadways. And are there any mitigation strategies that can be done to help relieve some of the risk there? And I should mention that all of this information I'm showing today is still considered draft and preliminary, and we haven't released anything publicly yet. And that's the phase we're in now, is digesting the information and turning it into the most useful product. So as I mentioned, we now have all of the data that we identified for Marin. We've run models, lots of model simulations. We're combining everything together now into, I've been referring to it as a GIS data sandwich, but it's basically multiple layers of data that we can then start to combine and weight and come up with a composite risk factor. What we're finding from the results of all of this work is that when you think about the model results in the context of mitigation projects, they're really falling into three sort of bins. So one is, fuel reduction projects, fire mitigation projects, vegetation management along roadways and so forth. The second is really related to how to manage the infrastructure and traffic flow. So for example, ahead of a fire or evacuation situation, you might want to pre-plan to have more human resources out directing traffic in certain areas. You may want to consider mitigation measures ahead of a fire during red flag days, for example, restricting parking in certain areas, making some roadways one way during red flag conditions and so forth. And then the third bucket is really around communication, education, and outreach. How do you better communicate to the public, how to prepare for an evacuation? How do you reach potentially vulnerable groups of people, elderly people, people with health conditions? What kind of planning can you do for them to help them have transportation during an event and have that all planned out ahead of time? And so we're really sort of distilling all this information down into some mitigation actions and developing the toolkit. I think I'm running a little bit short on time. So I just wanted to kind of step through one example. So a mitigation action in this example is if you take all the data that we have from the modeling and just the static data layers, and we start to overlay them, what you're looking at here is a composite evacuation difficulty score on roadways based on the traffic modeling, congestion, and so forth. And then Senate Bill 99 requires you to identify areas where there is a single road for egress in an area. And our partners at Fair and Peers have helped us develop that. And so that's what you're seeing in these red lines overlaid with the evacuation difficulty for the road links. And then overlaid on top of that is an approved fuel reduction project. And so you can start to see how all the information comes together. And in this particular case, that looks like a priority location for a treatment or fuel reduction. I'm going to skip this one. It's just another example where we're looking at different demographics within an evacuation zone and how you might do targeted research or outreach to, in this example, property managers who manage, large multi-family buildings can be actually really good sources to disseminate information prior to an evacuation. And then again, I mentioned Senate Bill 99. As part of this work, we've gone through and identified all the parcel occupied roadways with single egress. And then State Assembly Bill 747 requires that you identify and define all sort of major evacuation routes. And again, working with our partners at Fair and Peers, we've developed these maps. So there's a lot of data that's coming from this study that can be used in other contexts by other agencies, which is good. So I will just jump to the summary. I'm almost done, just a couple more slides. Big picture, the literature review identified many evacuation risk factors associated with not only fire, but communications and traffic dynamics. We've completed the modeling and it's providing really valuable insights combined with the literature findings. We now have this very robust GIS database for Marin that can be used again by, other agencies. And then the results from the project will be used for wildfire evacuation planning and to meet regulatory guidelines as needed. And I've already mentioned how critical the technical advisory team has been in the success of this project. I think specific to Marin, we really have had some good findings that have bubbled up to the top here. And so just really quickly, one is evacuation plans should really carefully consider and think about what the dynamics would be if there were fires that were occurring at different times of the day. One thing that we discovered in the modeling is that managing an evacuation during rush hour and when schools are being released in Marin will encounter really different traffic patterns than, for example, a nighttime evacuation. It's also really important to understand the background traffic levels before the evacuation so that you can figure out how you're going to manage that when you actually have to put more cars on the roadway. And then areas or situations with potential bottlenecks should be identified, and alternative routing, temporary safe parking areas or shelter in place locations could be considered for those areas ahead of an event. And then the planning should be considered for populations with limited mobility, elderly populations, people with health conditions or lack of access to transportation. So with that, we are currently in the process of, again, completing all the modeling and interpretation of the results, developing an online GIS map library, and the mitigation toolkit. And these will all be coming out fairly soon. So I'm sorry if I went a little bit long there, but that's wanted to kind of showcase some of the neat things that are coming out of the study.
Thank you. Mark, anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add a couple quick comments before we get to your guys' questions. And thank you, Tammy. I mean, this is amazing work that they're doing. Did want to put a couple parameters on some of the comments, and I saw some eyebrows rise. Like Tammy said, that there is no suppression efforts. Also, in the modeling, there's no traffic control efforts. So when we talked about the 2 to 4 hours from Fairfax to the Civic Center, that's with no traffic control. That's with getting them all the way to the Civic Center. That's not to safety. And so one of the things that this pointed out to us is that the model was all forcing them west or eastbound on Sir Francis Drake. Well, this model, when it tells us, well, wait a minute, we got this 2 to 4 hours and they're all going this way, but you can also get to the Civic Center by going west on Sir Francis Drake, hit Nicasio, go to Lucas Valley. And so perhaps some of the traffic management plan could be 150 cars that way, 150 cars this way. And so that's why it's important to put that 2 to 4 hours in context. And
yeah, thank you, Mark, for that context. That's
yeah, thank you, Tammy. And then I'm so happy with the alignment of our projects already with the modeling. It shows that our member agencies are on it. The ATC's already taken some of the draft data and have started scoping some of their projects around this. So that's excellent. And then you can see with the SB 99 and the AB 747 work, it's helping our member agencies with their general planning.
Thank you. Other questions, starting with Catherine.
One comment, one question. Comment is this work is so important, and I have a personal story from 2 days ago. Francis Drake out of Inverness was closed because of a landslide for 2 hours. And it was a situation where I was on my way to hospital because a friend was there having surgery, and I had to just stand by until the road was open again. So again, those of us in West Marin, it's one way in and one way out, Bolinas, Stinson, Inverness, et cetera. So we really need to look at this and figure out what our vulnerabilities, know what our vulnerabilities are, and then plan our strategies going forward. Second thing, this is a question, and I'm referring to Mark, your staff report before this presentation, saying that these models were being done in Fairfax, Nevados, San Rafael, and Tam Valley and Inverness as a beginning, and the technical advisory team will be providing feedback of the results of current conditions in the next few weeks. I would like to know when in the next few weeks and how we're going to get that information. Are we going to wait until next month's meeting to get that, especially for those of us that are already in the model pilot?
So we've already met with Inverness, with the Inverness Public Utilities District, Marin County Fire, Marin County Sheriff, Marin County Public Works on that specific data. And that was how they were able to use that data specifically to build projects around it.
Okay, so no, so the results then have been shared,
Well, we,
results of this study?
there's a question that we need to answer is about how much of the data is going to be publicly consumable.
Okay.
Because without context of that data, then the public can come to assumptions that aren't correct. And so much of the data will be for planning purposes of our fire planners, our road planners, and our community development planners, and Office of Emergency Management. So the data is already available to the agencies that are making a decision, but we're not likely to make all of it available to the entire public.
Thank you.
Barbara?
Thank you for the presentation. Excellent. And thanks for choosing Fairfax as one of the pilots. I like what you did with looking at the evacuation with our 3 schools in Fairfax, but you know, and I understand Ross Valley Fire Board is really excited about this. They feel it matches up really well. So that's great. As a layperson, one of the things that I know about Fairfax is the Cascades area is really where we expect the burns to be out of sight, crazy. And I'm a little surprised that the area that you showed as being the high burn area, which is not as heavily vegetated. And I understand that's where our shaded fuel break is, but I'm wondering, are we going to look at the Cascades area, which is not very high fire severity zones, but high and the highest in Fairfax? So maybe Mark can answer that.
Yes, and part of the reason where the ignition sources were selected was based on frequency of fires and historically. However, even though the ignition points were not in the Cascade Canyon, the modeling shows how the fire would spread when the new embers land in the Cascade Canyon. So we're actually able to discern how the fire will burn through the Cascade Canyon. And so that's extrapolated when we start creating the overall risk matrix for the projects.
Okay, so excuse my ignorance, but I didn't see that in the map. What I saw was that whole area along Sir Francis Drake. I didn't see it going to the Cascades. Did I just miss that?
With the scale of the map, it was hard to see, especially with the fire perimeter overlaying the map. Actually, the very end of the blue was into Woodacre and up to Pine Mountain.
Okay, thank you.
And we actually did do fire growth simulation in the area above Cascade Canyon. I just didn't have time to show all of the results for all of the test communities. It's a lot of information, but yes, we did. And we also looked at evacuation congestion along Cascade Canyon. And that turned out to be a congestion point. And so that will, once we start digesting and distilling everything down from the modeling, we'll have results for both the test areas and then results sort of extrapolating them across the county.
Thank you very much. That's great to hear, because that's where a lot of we have worry all over, but that is an area of extreme worry. Thank you.
And just to clarify, we are modeling the entire county.
Yeah. You want to add something, Charlotte? Okay, Rachel.
Thank you for the report. It was going through, it was making me a little bit nervous. And then I was thinking back when we actually approved the project, we talked about how, I mean, like Barbara was saying, we know Cascade Canyon is a fire zone, right? You just drive through there and you're like, oh no, or Kent Woodlands, right? Oh no. So, but I think what this is really doing is bringing back that, the data, the actual data, because you know, what we've heard before we approved this was, sure, the fire departments know the key areas, but that's just, you know, almost hearsay in a way in history. And so what this will provide is so much data and examples, and the modeling is fantastic. But I do think it's going to be a tool that's used by professionals more than by the community. And so I think the messaging for the community may be limited to, we're developing new tools for the professionals. And so to be able to use, because I think if you put this in the hands of the community, there will be more questions than answers and more concerns. I do have a couple of questions. I was wondering, in the data of the recent fires, if you've gone as recent as the fire in Boulder and Paradise and Tahoe, or were these more historical? And the second question, so that was on the data piece, are you looking at potentially the RENA numbers that we're all having to deal with, of like using our 2040 housing elements, and how to bring that piece in?
Yeah, so first question, were you referring to the literature review, going back and looking at, yeah, we looked at pretty much anything that was published that was as new as we could find. And we went back, I'd say probably 15 or 20 years ago. So yeah, we looked at the Camp Fire, the Boulder Fire, and many others. There's not a lot of fatality data available readily. I mean, you can get to it if you really dig, but yeah, we did a survey across a lot of the major fires recently. And then to the second question, our partners at Fair and Peers we're not our Sonoma Technology as a company is not planning, experts. But Fair and Peers are, and they've done a lot of work, here specifically in Marin. And so, yeah, they're helping us put context around the general plan questions and issues. And we're hoping to provide some good information coming out of this that could support that.
Great, thank you.
Julie.
I was surprised that Ross Valley Fire Department was not on the TAT. Is that because, Mark, you were on the TAT and so you kind of represented Ross Valley Fire Department?
There was representation from different zones,
Uh-huh.
and trying to remember if we had one specific from Ross Valley Fire. It would have been listed more about like the agency, but yeah, I was able to bring that Ross Valley perspective. And was Jordan Reeser on there? Jordan
Yes.
Reeser was able to bring the Ross Valley perspective in.
And then I agree with what Rachel's saying in terms of the purpose of this study. But I'm sure people in the public are going to get a hold of this study. And I'm thinking maybe we should put a footer on every single page to explain, I'm serious, what the purpose is, and that the simulation assumes no fire suppression and no traffic control, so that people don't just see this like Rachel and I were watching, like freaking out, right? I think it's really important to indicate and maybe have a cover sheet also that this is for planning purposes and prioritization of our projects.
And this was a frequent conversation with the TAT.
Yeah, okay, good,
If-
thank you.
If I may respond to that also, Julie, I think that is exactly what we're going through right now. We want to give the member agencies a chance to propose solutions and take in all this information and all the simulations. It's really important that the agencies have a chance to ingest all of this data and all of this modeling, and then they're already doing a lot, but some of it needs adjustment. Some of it will be new projects as a result of this modeling. And going out with this research study to the public together with solutions, not just putting out what the study says without any actions that will be accompanying this work.
Thank you. Fred.
Yeah, Mark, can you just give maybe a little bit more background on the mechanics of the tool, in the sense that I'll just look at Corte Madera, Larkspur, we have Magnolia. Does that tool, it's the same type thing with most marine areas? I think there's only one way in and one way out to a certain degree. Does that mean that Central Marin would have access to the tool? They run the modeling, and then from there they can determine evacuation points, and then they'll take all that and work with Central Marin Police to figure out, and Corte Madera, Larkspur, as far as resources, how to move the traffic?
That's part of the toolkit that Tammy was discussing, and we're on track for this to be completed prior to June of this year. So it's a resource that can be used immediately, and the the layering and the coordination of our member agencies be able to reach back to Sonoma Technology. We'll be able to dig in exactly what is that risk in that area. And that's when, if it's a traffic coordination risk, that's where Central Marin Fire and Central Marin Police Authority can get together and create that plan on how they're going to get the flow of traffic. Perhaps it's no parking on red flag days, perhaps it's traffic boxes, or perhaps it's Tamalpais is all one-way traffic. So that's just an example in a traffic sense. For where we have communication issues, that's where we can work with OEM on how we change the communication to that area. And then the fire risk is the obvious one. It's how we can manipulate wildfire prevention efforts either on a roadway or like a shaded fuel break.
Okay, so is the expectation is in that case, Central Marin Fire would be taking the lead, I want to say, on developing the plan, or do we, like Larkspur, Corte Madera, do we as elected officials or our town managers have to get involved somehow? I'm just trying to figure out how that it's all organized.
It's really designed to be at the practitioner level, the law enforcement people who are planning the evacuations, the planning personnel. And we encourage it to be the law enforcement people that are taking the lead on the traffic planning, the community development agencies to take the lead on their aspects of it. And that's why we included multi-jurisdictional and discipline participation on the TAT, so we can get their input on how they would use that tool, and then we'll make that tool available for all the public agencies.
Okay, seems like there needs to be a coordinated effort then between police and fire.
And that's where the partnerships come in.
Yeah, okay. And I throw in public works only because if roads need to be blocked off or traffic lights need to be timed, public works comes into play.
Exactly.
Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. I have a couple of questions. I mean, I think this is all really interesting and exciting. So thanks to everyone who's been involved. One, to clarify, because I've heard a couple of different things, is the finished product here, a PDF? Is it like a toolkit like Marin Maps where you can actually, where you're doing some of that modeling or playing around with layers live? Is it a both and?
It'll actually reside on Marin Map behind a firewall that our member agencies only have access to it.
Okay, great, cool. And then a related question is there any thought to having like a training program for member agencies?
Yes, it's actually built into the program. Great question.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And then does the fact that it kind of lives on Marin Maps mean that the toolkit can be iterated over the years? So if we come to realize that there's missing layers or something needs to be added, it's a flexible model in that sense.
100%. We did not want this to be a binder sitting on a shelf getting dusty and not updated.
Okay, and then the last question I have, kind of related to iterations, has to do with relative road risk and if the width of the road is taken into account at all, because I'm thinking of homes in my community that are in the hills, and if there's a fire up there, coming down versus having trucks go up, or having, someone trying to get up to an elderly family member to evacuate them. It's not just the slope and all of that stuff, but the width is actually, I think, a huge factor. And
Yeah, absolutely.
was it on the criteria? I didn't see it listed for the relative road risk.
It wasn't listed in the slide that I showed, but yes, we are factoring that in. We've been iterating on all the different models. So yes, it's included now.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all my questions, and I disagree slightly on the public versus that piece, but that's, I think, a conversation for another day.
Thank you, Alexis. Other questions? And Mark, this is kind of looked at as a DPW tool too, where to put their resources.
Very much so.
I think that's an important part of it, the pre-work that they can do. to
Very
help.
much. And we also see a huge benefit for our member agencies when it comes to their general plan and their safety element of their general plan.
Okay, public comment. See if anyone online wants to make a comment, please, Martina.
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the evacuation egress ingress risk assessment update, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those joining by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself. And sir, it does look like we have a comment from Larry Minigus. You should be able to deliver your comments, sir.
Yes, good afternoon. Tammy, thank you so much. I just want to add that, we're seeing a lot right now in the news on locally on water supply and what's being done there. This work is going on very quietly, but this is incredibly important work, and it's going to result in saving lives. And we're lucky to have the benefit of others' experience, like Napa, Sonoma, Paradise, where they didn't have these tools. And this is really going to put us miles ahead when that disaster does come. And I also want to note that when Tammy was showing Fairfax, within 24 hours, I don't know if anyone noticed this, but it was right where the main fire station is in Woodacre. So hope everyone's paying attention to that. Thank you.
Other comments, Martina?
And if there are any additional members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, the evacuation egress ingress risk assessment update, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those joining by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself. And sir, there are no additional comments.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to bring you back to the board. No actions required, and I'd like to just move on to the next item. Barbara, quick comment?
Just a quick question. When do we expect this to be completed? I forget. Was it mid 2024 or the end of 2024?
For actually this phase of the project, it is between May and June of this year that'll be completed. And then we can move forward. If we decide we put a pause in the development of the software on where it could be in a more interactive software, or do we want to table development of that project, leave funding so that our member agencies can work direct with STI? And we're tending to lean to the latter.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then real quick, then, if you don't mind, standing invitation to any board member that wants to dig deep into this, just give me a call. This is fascinating, and I'll spend as much time as you want.
All right, thank you. So we're running a little behind, but we're going to move on with item B, which is the wildfire risk perceptions survey.
And while Martina brings Josh Dimon over to present, I'll just open it up real quick. It's this wildfire risk perception survey is going to allow us to start creating and track our metrics for goal 4, which is public education. And it's establishing our baseline. And we have to have a baseline in order to be able to start setting targets and track how you're doing with that target. We've been using community-based focus groups to co-design the survey, and we're increasing our diversity, equity, inclusion through this survey. And then it's also going to allow us to determine where we have gaps in our DEI and plan how to fill those gaps. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Josh.
Thanks, Mark. And thank you, board members, for having me. I will quickly share my screen and aim to get through this relatively quickly, but still give you the content you need. So this is part of a multi-module survey that the board approved last year. This first phase, which goes through the end of this fiscal year, is for the design of the actual survey itself and using best practices. I'll get into a little bit of why we decided to design it the way we are, which is a co-design process with community partners. This is the group of people that we've been working with. I've been working with an incredible team, including connections to some of the other programs that you've been talking about. We have 3 Grizzly Corp fellows, one of them past, 2 present. We're working with Elaine Wilkinson as well, and of course, Charlotte. And the focus groups we've been running with a number of community organizations here, which you can see, and I'll get to again in a little bit. So real quick, although I don't feel I need to explain this in too much depth to you all, but why do we need a survey? We all have kind of gut feelings about what's going on, what's needed, ideas of where good projects might be the most relevant. One, it's clearly to provide the baseline, it's to provide that evidence to back up our gut intuition, to get at a fully representative sample of Marin residents, and their perspectives, their access to information, their preparedness. It was interesting, actually, every time I hear a project presentation from the other MWPA partners, I see all of the potential integrations here. We've been hearing clearly a lot about evacuation concerns just as in the preliminary phases of this survey design ourselves. Identify, as Mark said, outstanding successes where things are really working well, potential gaps or opportunities that might emerge, learning, especially in the qualitative design phase of this, what we didn't know, which is pretty fascinating. Track outcomes in programming, of course, as this is iterated over time. So starting with a baseline, updating different seasons, different time periods. And then the added element of this I think is really important is building up partnerships with communities across Marin and bringing them into a lot of this work that's being done, which will also, of course, build co-ownership over the work that MWPA does. So this is the plan that was approved in 2022. Last year. It was 4 modules. I'll talk about 3 right now because the 4th is a little bit longer term and has to do with integration with some of the other projects going on in terms of risk assessments and things like that. Module 1 was budgeted this year, which is the design phase of the community survey, which focusing on co-designing focus groups. So doing the qualitative side of testing out questions, understanding, running focus groups to get people's perspectives, starting with very general questions, and then using that to help us build our survey question pool, as well as how we're doing outreach, how we're connecting with community groups. Module 2, which is what we're planning for the next fiscal year, starting in July, will be the implementation of the actual large-scale survey itself, door-to-door, quantitative based survey, in partnership with our community partners. And 3, which we're also looking to start as soon as we start getting sufficient results back from the survey implementation, which is to build up the analysis and construct a geodatabase, which as Tammy called it, a GIS sandwich of layers that have to do with residents' perspectives and understandings of these issues. This has been our time frame so far. Really began building this up and building community partnerships or building up community partnerships. A lot of these are partnerships that already existed in some degree or another. We've been building those out and expanding them through this work starting in October last year, compiling all the existing data, doing some review work, and then developing the base question pool, starting from member agency feedback. So that's where we started with our questions, was from the MWPA and member agencies sending us questions that they were interested in learning about. We've been iterating that through that in partnership with community focus groups. January is when we really started ramping up co-design and scheduling focus groups, iterating those questions. We also added a component to the work plan to fill in gaps where there weren't really clear community partners, and that's doing ad hoc interviews just outside public gathering spaces, supermarkets, and other locations. February and March, so we're still in the middle of this phase, is running all of the focus groups, and I'll get to some numbers in a second in terms of what we've gotten through, continuing ad hoc interviews, and then scheduling out the ones where there was lower capacity. March, starting this month, as we're wrapping up the focus groups and then extending through April, is where we're doing all of the meat of the analysis, the transcription, the cleaning, the coding, all the stuff that goes into qualitative data analysis, and being able to pull out some insights from all of that will feed into the survey implementation, as well as geocoding all of those results and getting it on a mapping interface that can then interface with some of the other projects and things going on. May through June is where we're aiming to use all of the outputs of that analysis to develop the sample frame that we're going to be using for the survey implementation. Co-plan that implementation with our community partners, bring on some professionals, participatory community survey teams to augment capacity where we don't have those same level of community partnerships, and build out the concrete plan. So in June, we can hit the ground. I mean, in July, we can hit the ground running with the actual survey, which is what would happen from July through September. October, November this year, we're aiming to do the analysis of the results from the quantitative survey. And then result in some actionable intelligence to feed into next year's work plan, ideally. And then beyond that is where we would plan on doing kind of maintenance stuff where we're iterating small components of that survey on some regular interval during different times of year, during fire season or during winter, during times like now where these super heavy rains and people's perspectives and understandings and concerns might be different than during super dry periods. And that'll allow us to start building out both the longitudinal understanding of these issues, but also track over time what's changing. These are some of our numbers, just trying to keep track of time here so I don't drag everyone down too far. These are the zones we're aiming to hold or we've held to in Novato. The red are focus groups that we've held either entirely in Spanish or multilingually, 2 in San Rafael. We've held 2 so far in West Marin, in Stinson. We are going to hold 1 in Inverness, and then we're going to hold a couple that are kind of across the villages of West Marin and find ways to make sure people can attend those, as well as some additional ad hocs to manage village-based responses out in West Marin. So connecting to some of what you were all saying about West Marin. Central Marin 2, Southern Marin 3, and JPA wide, we've held 1, and we're planning on another 1 in multilingual. Overall, these are the numbers that we're likely to reach with all of this. So between about 155 people across all these zones in qualitative focus groups, and 220 or 65 in our ad hoc interviews, adding up to about 220 total. Just 2 examples of some of the breakdowns. I didn't want to throw all of our charts in here and overwhelm everyone, but just as an example of some of the respondents we've been getting. Now, this is only for our focus groups, not for our ad hoc interviews. That data is still being compiled. So age range, we have a pretty even split between 28, 44, 45 to 64, and then 65 plus. Across all of our focus groups so far. Again, there's a number of focus groups where still need to be held, especially in West Marin. So that's gonna alter the numbers overall a little bit, but this is what we've been seeing. And monthly household income, we've had a good representation of very low income residents. Now, these are income brackets that are taken from California Department of Public Health. And so a number of our focus groups have really reached lower income residents that aren't necessarily traditionally respondent to surveys or these sorts of outreach modalities. And then we have a good mix of other income levels. And again, this is going to likely evolve as we complete the remainder of our focus groups that we have planned and add in the ad hoc interview data as well. So preliminary highlights, because we're in the middle of coding, transcribing, and processing all of this now. It's this phase is not going to result in quantitative intelligence. It's going to result in qualitative outputs. Most of that qualitative output is feeding into how we design and implement the survey, but there are some interesting suggestions, perspectives, and other things that we've already been hearing from focus groups, and that's what I'm sharing here. So in public outreach and education, we've heard that community networks themselves, and this is interesting because there are some, where we have really strong community partners. There are some where there's really strong existing community networks that already share and have real strong resident connections. But we've actually heard this across a number of our focus groups in other areas as well, which is that the people in their immediate neighbors consider themselves pretty good conduits for sharing information like this. And I'm not talking about like next door or necessarily digital versions of that, but even just in-person connections. Of course, we've heard repeatedly that there's a thirst for more information resources in Spanish. FireSafe is producing all their resources in Spanish right now. They want more. I think this is a great example of where things are growing, and also where there's a real interest in getting more of it out there. There's a desire, as we've also been hearing in terms of some of these amazing plans for drills and evacuation drills, especially connected to Emberstomp. That's something we've been hearing a lot, is people want to do more drills. They want to have an idea of what exactly things might look like in an event. Even if it's very local, even if it's just down the street to a local refuge or something else, just to bring peace of mind. Some level of evacuation planning or refuges, which of course connects right to the presentation that you just heard. Vegetation management, people want more. Some people weren't always aware of what was going on, but when they were excited about it, and there's interest in wanting more. Grants, there's kind of varied results of what people knew. Some people knew about grants pretty in depth. Not everyone did. Almost everyone we've talked to knew something about how to reduce risks at the home. I think this speaks to the DSpace evaluations that have been going on around the JPA. And most homeowners that we've talked to, the vast majority of homeowners we've talked to have had positive experiences with those evaluators and the process as a whole. So I will skip through most of this. There's just some little anecdotes that connect somewhat to what I just said. But I think it's also interesting. We have a suggestion about a senior to senior group. So older adults connecting to high school seniors to help them with the technology that connects to how you get notifications for emergencies and all of that, because that was a big struggle. So it was a really interesting suggestion that came out of one of our focus groups. The fact that some emergency alerts are mistranslated or aren't translated was a big concern for groups. And then we had this interesting suggestion from a much older adult that previously in the 50s, it seems that one of the fire stations at least may have had some sort of semi-Morse code fire alarm that actually told people the directioning of a fire, which was pretty interesting. We wouldn't have even expected that was something that we would have learned from that. So the next phase of this is the implementation. As I said, this is just a simple parcel map of this part of Marin. We're aiming for about 2,000 surveys, so pretty large scale survey. We're going to be using area stratified random sampling, which allows us to focus on inclusivity, making sure we can get representative samples of each of the strata of relevance. Community partners will co-facilitate. Like I said, we'll bring in a team to fill in those gaps where needed, compensate people for their time, like we've been doing so already. There's going to be a balance between statistical validity and ensuring that, but also ensuring that we reach members, residents that are typically left out of standard survey and polling models. So some of that may mean that we have to be a bit adaptable and flexible in how we do that. And that's where our community partners really play a big result. And then analyze and visualize through a geodatabase, most likely. And that's where I am leaving it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Questions, Rachel?
It's a great presentation. Couple of questions. How are the community organizations identified? And I don't know what Marin County Cooperation Team is. I don't know what that one is. And then another question is, are you already starting to see some differences in the feedback from these different groups?
Sure. So we identified preliminary community partners by kind of casting a very wide net or reaching out to a wide variety of community partners and connecting with some existing networks that do somewhat similar work. Like there's a community response team framework that's connected to some of the pandemic and public health outreach that's been going on in the last couple of years. And a lot of the community partners that are involved in that have been incredible partners in this as well, because they're already familiar. They have connections with residents. They have networks that already do kind of information outreach. So that's been one of the primary ways we've reached out. Differences between groups. Yes, a little bit. So in some of that has to do with geography. So there's been a lot of talk about Fairfax already, and we did a focus group with older adults in Fairfax, and we heard a lot of the concerns that I think are pretty clear to everyone here around very, very, very significant concerns about evacuation, how people are going to get out, especially those that have mobility and have to walk or don't have a car. So we were asking significantly there about, do you have connections and agreements with neighbors? Some yes, and some no. So I think there is a lot of space for people even emerging out of that focus group where we were asking questions. I think they realized some connections in the group itself to engage with each other more there. Other groups, so like we talked a lot. So Marin County Cooperation Team is a partner in Marin City. And so they do a lot of work around pandemic response and public health outreach, and they have existing networks that they work with. So they helped work with us to co-facilitate a focus group in Marin City. And in that one, we heard an interesting mix. There's happiness that there's some veg management going on, which is one of the MWPA projects around the hill on the kind of surrounding Marin City. There's an interest in learning more about that and engaging more with those that are doing that work to try and understand what's going on, what the timeframes are. So I think there's a lot of interest in more consistent and regular communication so that they know what's going on and so that their voices are being heard if there's issues that come up. I think there's also concerns around developments and whether they're, interestingly enough, whether they're building effective defensible space as a prerequisite for new developments, and whether that's part of the planning process and how to do that. So those are just two examples. In the few that we've held for West Marin, we've heard similar to what you said, which is that one way in, one way out is a really big concern. And I think evacuation is a pretty dominant concern for almost everyone.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Catherine.
So I hear that we are doing everything to get the right input from the right people who represent all of us in Marin, that we are eventually in July going to have a survey, that the questions are being formed based on what you receive. And survey questions have to really be careful not to be prejudicial so that you get a pure answer out of it. So this sounds really helpful. And what I'm concerned about is, will we keep asking these questions to see how we're improving?
Yes, thank you. And that's exactly the principle behind this qualitative design phase where we're co-designing with community partners, is exactly that, is to leave biases out the door, work with those that have pre-existing trust networks and connections with community, and understand how that feeds into recruitment and questions. The idea is that, yeah, after the baseline is completed, there'll be updates over time, so that progress can be tracked exactly, where questions will be asked again. It could be recurring survey participants, and we'll work with our community partners on how exactly that works and what that looks like.
Thank you. Other questions? All right. Charlotte, anything to add? We can go to public comment then. Don't see any in the chamber.
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, please raise your hand in the reactions. And sir, it looks like we have a comment from a Cheryl Paddock and Maria from NMCS. We'll start with Cheryl. Welcome, Cheryl. You should be able to deliver your comment now.
Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Cheryl Paddock. I'm the CEO of North Marin Community Services. We are proud to be an MWPA partner. We've been serving Novato as a human service nonprofit for 50 years. And during the pandemic, we did become the lead to the Novato community response team. We've also entered climate action work. Further to a comment that was just made, we do serve 10,000 people a year here in Novato, and 78% are people of color. So we are a strong equity partner with you. And last year, thanks to funding from the Marin Community Foundation, we launched the Novato Equitable Climate Action Initiative, so that our partnership with you in this workshop was under that area. And we're really looking to accelerate equitable climate action and community resilience in Novato by deepening cross-sector partnerships like we are with MWPA. We know that under-resourced communities are often impacted during disasters and emergencies. And Novato, we have to use a certain outreach strategy here because we're so geographically spread out. And so having effective public and private partnerships is really important so that we can reach all of our under-resourced communities. We were happy to be a part of this survey. We were also very inspired to see the Latina community members who attended the 2 focus groups in Spanish at our facilities and really lift up their voice and concerns on wildfire. And so thank you for your partnership and giving a voice to people in our community.
Thank you. Anyone else, Martina?
And sir, it looks like we have a comment from Maria A. with NMCS. Maria, you should be able to deliver your comment at this time. Welcome to the meeting. Maria, are you? It looks like you unmuted yourself, but we are unable to hear you. And so it does look like Maria may be having some technical difficulties with the sound. Let's see if I can help out. We can kind of hear you, Maria. It sounds like your signal might not be so great.
Oh, sorry.
There we
Probably
go.
it's the internet. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Sorry for the difficulties. My name is Maria Albuja. I'm from North Marin Community Services. I'm the Climate Action Coordinator. Just I would like to highlight that Cheryl just mentioned, and I would like to add that the focus group in our community expressed the lack of information, especially the tenants from the apartment complex, about the fire area defenses, how to use fire extinguishers, and what to do in a fire emergency. And they will love to have more information because for them it's really important, especially we're really close to start the fire season, and we receive feedbacks after the focus group, and the community would like to participate in trainings, and they already ask for encourage the managers or the owners to be involved in these conversations to help them to receive the training for the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. And if there are any additional members of the public wishing to speak on the current item, please raise your hand in the reaction. And for those joining by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand. And so it does not appear that there are any additional comments for the wildfire risk perception survey.
Thank you. So bring it back to the board member. Any board members, any further comments? Other than say thank you to Jonathan. And I really appreciate the presentation. Anything additional on this item? If not, we'll move on to item 11, which is board member requests for future items, future agenda items. And seeing no one raising their hand, we'll move to adjournment to April 20th. So thank you all for hanging out with us today and enjoyed the in-person meeting. So thank you,
everybody.